back to Momentum Boost. I'm your host, Adrienne Gold-Davis, and I'm very grateful that you decided to join us tonight on this special boost. You know, this past week has been a painful one for us Jews. We are in turns mortified and horrified, and then proud and defiant, and then afraid, and then suddenly fearless. And as the world media, both social and traditional, spews rhetoric that's lacking in nuance and loaded with half-truths, it becomes more and more important that we have the education, the language, and the sophistication to respond to the questions from our family, from our friends, and our coworkers. So last month, we hosted a special three-part series on the roots of anti-Semitism with Dr. Rachel Fish, and our audience who registered for this were spellbound by her revelations, by her even-handed and objective approach, and by her depth and her breadth of knowledge. So we've brought her back tonight for a special boost to help us unravel this newest situation so that we don't have to resort to getting our news via social media. And that is inherently a biased format because they work with an algorithm that shows you only what they perceive that you want to hear. And a true education requires careful examination of facts. It requires discernment, and it requires sharp, critical thinking skills. And I, for one, am really not interested in fashion videos or influencers or celebrity posts. Thank you very much. I want to learn from an intellectually honest place. And let's remember that as people of the book, we value questions as much as answers, and that we debate and struggle in our pursuit of truth. So tonight, we have to talk about Israel, what's going on, what the future holds, and how we can help. Dr. Rachel Fish, the founding executive director of the Foundation to Combat Anti-Semitism, she's joining me tonight for this special boost to answer our questions and to give us real ways to support our beloved Israeli family, our friends, our community, and our Jewish homeland. Dr. Fish is a celebrated academic with 20 years of experience in the fields of Israeli history, Zionist thought, and Middle Eastern studies. She's published extensively and is frequently called upon to advise on community interventions to reclaim an Israel discourse that is nuanced and complex while remaining accessible to the broader audiences. Most recently, Dr. Fish was the founding executive director of the Foundation to Combat Anti-Semitism, which was established to catalyze dynamic new solutions to stop the age-old hatred advanced by those who seek the elimination of Judaism, of the Jewish people, and the modern movement to destroy Israel's only Jewish state. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Rachel Fish.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. It truly is a pleasure to be here with you and the Momentum community. So thank you for the opportunity to learn together. I'm actually going to present my screen in just a moment, just to give you a sense of the roadmap. We are going to talk about the confluence of events that led into the crisis that occurred for the last 11 days or so in Israel with Hamas, with Palestinians who are citizens of the state of Israel, and with Palestinians in the West Bank. Then we're going to talk about the way in which this crisis played out in social media. For many of you, that may be what you're seeing in your feeds, what your children, your grandchildren are seeing, and the impact this has on one's understanding of this complex conflict and relationship between Israelis and Palestinians, and the relationship it has, or the challenge it has for the relationship for many of us with the state of Israel, and what that means for future generations of Jews engaging with Israel. So let me share my screen and pull up the presentation. Great. So let's begin this conversation. In order to really understand what has happened over the last 11 days or so, we do need to look at a variety of factors that have influenced and not just the last 11 days, but have been building over time to create the moment that we have experienced these last 11 days. As many of you know and are very familiar with, the reality in Israel is that we have seen over the last 2 years 4 national elections. And these 4 national elections have not resulted in creating a stable government within Israel. It has meant that the individuals who are responsible for governing have actually been focused on politicking and have actually not taken the responsibility as leaders of the state. We also know that in each of these elections, we continue to see a rightward shift of political parties in Israeli society. There's a trend for the last, I'd say, 2 decades in Israel in which we have been seeing that rightward shift, but it has become all the more so pronounced, which also is one of the challenges for many American Jews, because American Jewish voting patterns continue to be left of center, staunchly Democrat, whereas Israeli Jews, right of center and more right. This rightward shift has not only played out in the political sphere, but it's also playing out within Israeli society on the ground. We see a greater sense of religious fervor tied to nationalism, creating a sense in some cases of xenophobia, some hostility towards individuals who are not Jewish, but rather who are of another identity, in this case, primarily Arab citizens. We also continue to see that rightward shift not only translates into rightward policy positions that are being advocated, but in terms of interpersonal relationships on the ground and a sense of trying to prioritize the Jewishness of the state at the expense of the democratic character of the state. And that relationship of Jewish and democratic is a relationship which we have talked about in the past, where you need to have a tenuous, healthy relationship between the two. It needs to have a good tension. And when you privilege one over the other, it has implications on the ground between peoples. We have also seen a frustration among Palestinians who are Arab citizens of the state of Israel. And this is actually not a new challenge that just emerged within the last 2 years. The Robert Orr Commission, he's a Supreme Court justice of the Israeli Supreme Court, in 2000 ran an exposition in which he was trying to understand what was happening with increased tensions in the mixed cities, particularly in Yaffo and places in Haifa, where there were tensions between Israeli Jews and Israeli Palestinians who are citizens of the state. And in that report in 2000 from the Orr Commission, he already articulated what Israeli leadership, governance, police, and legal support needed to be put in place in order to address the issues that were facing and plaguing the Arab citizens of the state, mostly around socioeconomic challenges, issues related to a lack of infrastructure within their communities and towns, inability to find employment, and the lack of opportunity for education. Because none of this was truly addressed, even in that period of 2000, we continue to see how those issues have only become more exacerbated over time. And specifically, we have seen, and we have saw this very clearly in the last Israeli election, that Arabs within the state were concerned about crime within their communities. They were concerned about gambling. They were concerned about violence and drugs. And they were actually calling for more of Israeli police presence in those communities in order to curtail those issues that were plaguing Arab villages and towns. Now, that sounds very different from the conversation that we see happening within social justice circles here, calling for a defunding of the police. In this situation, there was a desire to have a greater increase of police presence, which Israel did not provide. So this is part of the challenge also. Another piece that you probably have heard some about is what was happening in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. Now, without getting into a whole historical framework, which this does require, I do at least want to provide some scaffolding for you to understand what we are talking about when we say the phrase and the name Sheikh Jarrah. This is a neighborhood in East Jerusalem. It is a neighborhood, imagine if you are going to Hebrew University in Har HaTzofim and heading over to French Hill, it is the neighborhood on your way to Hebrew University. So many of you have probably passed it. It is an Arab community today, but it wasn't always that way. There were always an Arab presence, but there was also a Jewish presence in the neighborhood. There were 2 Jewish quarters in Sheikh Jarrah, and in those neighborhoods, there were homes that were owned by Jews before the establishment of the state in 1948. So in the 1870s, those residential places in Sheikh Jarrah, in the Jewish quarter, were Jewishly owned. What happens is that from that period of 1948 to 1967, East Jerusalem is under Transjordanian control. When Transjordan controls East Jerusalem, it means that there is not a Jewish presence. Jews are kicked out of Jerusalem. Remember when Jews don't have access to the old city? Remember when Jews can't go to the Kotel? Jews who had had a presence in that place for millennia were no longer allowed to be there under Transjordanian control. Similarly, Jews who lived in Sheikh Jarrah were removed. What was arranged was that Transjordan was going to give the deeds to Palestinians who would then, in return, leave or remove the label of being a refugee in order to be compensated with these homes. That happens in 1956. It was supposed to be that those deeds were transferred to those Palestinians, but Transjordan never transferred those deeds. What results then is a period in which Transjordan holds on to those deeds. And in 1967, Israel reclaims Jerusalem, unifies or reunifies East and West Jerusalem, and Jews want again to be able to be in the homes that they were originally in. There's a law that's passed in 1970, and the law was actually quite controversial when it was passed, and it was not a law that still, it's a law that still exists with debate. And the law said that Jews who had property before the establishment of the state had the right to return to it and to reclaim it and to be responsible for it and own it. And it's that is being debated about now who has the legal ownership of these residences in Sheikh Jarrah, located in East Jerusalem. Now, this is such a contested case that it went to the Supreme Court. And the reason the 1970 law also is debated is because there's no reciprocal understanding that Palestinians whose property was taken after the establishment of the state would have it returned. So that's why you see this sense of discrepancy and concern that's being displayed around which community, which population is privileged. Now, again, because it was such a debated issue and the Supreme Court then took that issue, the Supreme Court decided not to release their decision because of the increase in tensions between the Arab and Jewish populations, and said because of security reasons, they were going to hold on before making their decision public. So we don't yet know what the final decision is regarding Sheikh Jarrah. Now, this isn't just about what's happening in Israel proper. We also have to look at what's happening in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, and also what's happening in the Gaza Strip. We know that Palestinian elections were supposed to take place this past month, and Fatah has not had any political elections for the past 15 years. Whereas Israel's on steroids and having elections nonstop, the Palestinian Authority is reluctant to engage in elections. And part of the reason for that reluctancy is because the current leader of Fatah, Abu Mazen or Mahmoud Abbas, really understands that Fatah has lost great influence and credibility with the Palestinian people. And this has happened again over decades. And part of it is because of a failure of Fatah to be able to provide for its own Palestinians living in the West Bank. Part of it is discontent with the way in which conflict is managed. And part of it is also a question mark about, is this the political party that is willing to actually do what is needed in order to create a Palestinian state? That is also why Hamas is gaining influence even in the West Bank. We know that Professor Khalil Shikaki, who runs the Palestinian Research Policy Center, he used to be at Brandeis University with me, we worked together, and he said that with his polling, what he has seen over the last several decades in the West Bank is that Hamas is on the increase in terms of popularity, but not because of radical Islamist ideologies, but because of a real discontent and feeling of impotency around Fatah. So we now have to pay attention, and Israel very much has to pay attention to who will be the ruling political party in the West Bank. Now, in the Gaza Strip, we know that Hamas is the ruling party. Hamas has been in power since Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip. Hamas came into the power as a terrorist organization. It was very much a vote against Fatah, in that Hamas was able to control the territory. And Hamas uses the opportunities when tensions are high between Israelis and Palestinians to make them even more of an issue and to try to leverage that moment in order to demonstrate their ability to claim they support and really are the ones who make a difference to defend the Palestinian national identity. So when Hamas gets a chance, they then will use it in order to say, look at Fatah's impotency. We, Hamas, are doing much more than Fatah is able to do, and therefore we are the voice of the Palestinian people. Now, it's very important for me to say that not every Palestinian who lives in the Gaza Strip supports Hamas. Hamas is an authoritarian society. This is a terrorist organization. It uses the people who live in its midst as pawns for their own political purpose. Any ruling entity that is willing to risk innocent civilian lives is not someone that is willing to actually engage in doing the hard work of creating, building, and constructing a society that prioritizes and values life. And unfortunately, the Palestinians who live in the Gaza Strip are deeply oppressed because of the Hamas leadership. All of the money from the international community that has gone into the Gaza Strip has gone into the Gaza Strip and not gone to the Palestinian people, but rather to the infrastructure of murder, hostility, violence, and the network and building of arsenals for the purpose of hurting, harming, and murdering Jewish people in an attempt to destroy the Jewish state. Now, do not think for a second that what Hamas is doing, it is doing alone. Hamas is a proxy for Iran. And anytime Hamas is engaged in a battle with Israel, it is a proxy war for Iran. Hamas is influenced by Iran, just like Hezbollah in southern Lebanon is influenced by Iran, and Iran is the power entity in the region. It is why so many other countries, not only Israel, including Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and others, are deeply concerned about Iran's nuclear capabilities. So we really have to understand this, not just in terms of the local, which is important, but also the regional. Now, there are several holidays that have also happened over the past month, both the Gregorian calendar and the Hebrew calendar, that have coincided and led to also heightened tensions. You all know that it was the holiest month of Ramadan, this, several past weeks. This is a time in which you see a lot of pilgrimage happening to Al-Aqsa Mosque by Muslims who want to come and be spiritually engaged. This is a time in which, in general, you have heightened tensions when you do have holy days in Jerusalem, because there can be a bit of religious fervor that is built up. We also know it was just this past Saturday, Al-Nakba Day. Al-Nakba Day is the commemoration of the events for the Palestinians that occurred during the war of 1947 to 1949. Al-Nakba is the name used by Palestinians to identify the trauma the catastrophe of what they experienced in terms of losing their ability to have the connection to the land that they so deeply loved. This is a national holiday within Palestinian national memory. We also know that it was recently Yom HaAtzmaut, Israeli Independence Day, which was, preceded by Yom HaZikaron, the day of remembrance for fallen soldiers and victims of terrorism. Again, important national holidays for Israel. And a week or 2 weeks after Israeli Independence Day, it was Yom Yerushalayim. This day, which is called Jerusalem Day, is really highlighting the events of what took place in 1967, in which Israel was able to reunify Jerusalem. What has happened over the last several years is that Yom Yerushalayim has become a holiday that is used by some Israeli Jews who are politically right of center and come from more traditional Orthodox attitudes in Judaism to highlight Israel's presence, but particularly to kind of shove it in the face of those Arabs who are in the Muslim quarter. And those tensions are very high every year. There's an increased police presence in the Old City. And it's something that Israelis from across the political spectrum are challenged by, knowing that it's both a day of celebration, but there is a lack of sensitivity by some Israeli Jews in terms of how they actually engage in recognition of that day. Now, that explains the context. I should also just add, because it only happened a few hours ago, that Hamas and Israel have agreed to a ceasefire. Of course, once the ceasefire was announced, Hamas continued to shoot rockets. Hamas said that they were going to rain down rockets still on Haifa tonight. The military and intelligence in Israel is wide-eyed, waiting to see if anything happens. So there is a fragile ceasefire in place. So you should know that. Now, how does this relate to you? How does this relate to those of us who are on this call who are trying to make sense of what we are seeing come in media from popular TV personalities, whether it's Trevor Noah or John Oliver, whether it's from the media that you consume here in America or your social media feeds? And what I would say is that what we are seeing is that there is an American lens that is being grafted on to the Israeli-Palestinian crisis, which is about social justice framing. And it has become extremely simplistic and transposes an American understanding of issues between power and powerlessness onto Israelis and Palestinians. And it's a serious challenge that we are facing. And I would say we haven't seen anything like this to this degree with previous Israel-Palestinian conflicts. And it's not because those conflicts haven't existed. We know they have, but because of what's happening in the American political discourse and what's happening on social justice issues in this country, many of which we all care about, it is amplifying what we see play out within the Israeli-Palestinian framing. So the starting point for many of those personalities that I talked about is, does Israel have a right to exist? And what we're seeing is that the answer is maybe, maybe not. And the maybe not is because of the second point, which is there is an assumption that because Israel sees itself as a Jewish state and a democratic state, that because it identifies as Jewish, it is deemed to be anachronistic, meaning it's coming from a period of time that no longer exists. And it shouldn't exist today. That's why you hear the idea of one state for all its citizens. We also see Israel being labeled as a colonialist, imperialist state. What do I mean by that? Israelis are perceived as being white. Israel then is the white outpost in a region of people who are not white. And so therefore, because these movements are attempting to shirk off a colonialist identity and history, it means that Israel has to also remove itself in order to make room to allow for the Palestinians. Now, That doesn't mean that there actually shouldn't be a two-state paradigm. That's very much a possibility, and one that has been the working framework since 1937. But these individuals are suggesting that there would be a Palestinian state and not a Jewish state. We, of course, also see the demonization of Israel, the dehumanization of Israel, and a double standard that Israel is held to that no other nation state is held. Meaning, can you imagine if America had a terrorist organization firing over 3,700 rockets at innocent civilians, that America would not respond? Of course it would. So why should we ask Israel to do anything differently? And the dehumanization and the demonization, these are the pieces that lead to an igniting of anti-Semitic tropes, not just about Jews, but now it's about Jews and their Jewish sovereignty. And because it's about the Jewish sovereignty, we as Jews, just like Israelis, are asked to be held accountable for Israeli policy and governmental decisions. And that accountability demands from us that we say very clearly that we either distance ourselves from Israel, that we do not associate with Israel, because the original sin is now the sin of Israel being created. Similarly, this is part of some of the progressive movement's litmus test for how woke you actually are. Meaning, if you care about Black and brown lives, if you care about gender issues, if you care about other religions, then you should also inherently care about Palestinians. But what's challenging is that these social movements make it a clear binary, and they bifurcate. They say you have to care about Palestinians, which means you reject Israelis and the Jewish sovereignty. There's no middle ground to say, I care that Israel has a safe and secure Jewish and democratic state, while I care about the Palestinian people and desire for them to be able to have leadership that can bring a Palestinian state to live alongside. That, what I just said, is unacceptable to these individuals because it's too complex, it demands too much, and it actually requires us to hold ambiguity and difficulty. Now, I want to say just two quick things here about anti-Zionism. I know we're eager to speak together. Anti-Zionism has always been a legitimate position that exists within the conversation of responses towards issues related to anti-Semitism and assimilation within the Jewish community and within Jewish history. We know, for example, that anti-Zionism even exists within Israel, meaning the Haredi community is an anti-Zionist community. They don't serve in the army. They don't recognize the existence of the state. Why? Because they have to wait for the Mashiach to come. So that's an anti-Zionist position. We also know that there are Israelis who are anti-Zionist, who also label Israel as an apartheid and racist entity. That conversation is alive and well within certain circles in Israel. What I want to say to you is that the people who right now you see in your social media feeds saying, no, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm just anti-Zionist, they don't know anything what I just told you about the complexity of anti-Zionism. They're using anti-Zionism as a politically acceptable form of anti-Semitism. For them, it's a way to get around being labeled an anti-Semite and to say, I just don't think that Israel has a right to exist. Jews don't have a right to a state. And because most people don't know what anti-Zionism is, they get away with it. And what happens is that Zionism is falsely being labeled as a form of white supremacy, which is a clear use of the way of white supremacy is understood in an American historical context, being put onto a conflict that has nothing to do with the American history of Jim Crow laws, slavery, and the slave economy of the South. That is not the situation, and yet it is part of the conversation that we are seeing. Now, for those of you who are on social media, you may have seen some of these things. And I just want to give a few examples. And trust me, this is just a small smattering. Though we see from musicians, influencers, Hollywood stars, their perspective on the conflict. They take simplistic understanding using race, skin color, Black and brown children being murdered, your assumption is by people who aren't Black or brown. You see here, Susan Sarandon deciding to share her knowledge with us, in quotes, I'm saying that, around Israel being a entity engaged in settler colonialism and ethnic cleansing. This is not at all true. This is a horrific lie, and this is misinformation. But Susan Sarandon has no problem weighing in on this conversation. So these are the kinds of examples that you see. This social media, personality, so you want to talk about, was very popular, particularly during the Trump administration, where a lot of young people get their information about political issues. And they decided to do a 6 kind of slide post about ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, equating ethnic cleansing by Israel against the Palestinians in the period of the 1947-1949 war, which culminated in al-Nakba, the catastrophe. So this, again, is an example of how simplistic, superficial social media is to promote a very clear political agenda. And the question becomes, so what do we do about it? If you see this in your feed, how do you respond? Do you respond? And I'll just say a few things. One, I actually think that when you're scrolling, if you're sitting here doing this on your phone, it doesn't mean you stop using your critical thinking skills, right? We know that we still have to be asking the questions: who is writing this? Who is the intended audience? For what purpose is this being written? What facts are being used? What facts are actually excluded? What narrative is being used? Is there a specific call to action? And we need to ask ourselves these questions. And then we need to decide, do we want to engage? Is it for the purpose of countering misinformation and to challenge distortions and lies? Is it to actually say, look, I know that a lot of my friends are going to see this and they're don't knows, or they're kind of undecided, and so I need to respond. And that's where we have to really think this through. I usually say, if you're not in relationship with someone in real life, you should not be responding. It really does not serve any purpose, because any of these influencers, they don't know who you are. They don't care who you are. So why engage and actually give them any credence whatsoever? Because the majority of them, I would venture to say, can't even find where Tel Aviv is on a map. So I wouldn't worry so much about what some of these individuals think. And yes, do I think that their lies have an impact? 100%. Do I think that you responding to them with their lies is going to change their heart and mind? Absolutely not. So we have to figure out, again, when it's someone you know, can you say to that person, I saw that you posted some information about the conflict, and I want to say to you that what you posted troubled me because what you shared is historically inaccurate. And I would like to find time to have a conversation with you. Would you be open to that? That's one way to go about this. If you see someone, putting a hashtag like Free Palestine, you can write to that person and say, listen, I understand why you feel moved to want to be part of a movement, and because you care about individuals and you want to ensure human dignity for all individuals. So do I. But let me tell you what that hashtag actually connotes. And let me share that with you. Would you be open to having that conversation? And I think those are the conversations we should be thinking about. And I would encourage us, knowing full well that you do have to respond at certain times, but I find that if you engage in the response via a question, it opens up a much wider angle than if you come with a talking point and another one and another one. And I just want to say this, for every talking point that you have, someone has 3 others. And so all it takes is a little pushback, and then what well do you draw from for that next talking point? So I highly recommend and encourage each of us to take the responsibility that we have an onus upon ourselves, which is to actually engage and invest in learning and actually spend time with the complexity, not to throw up our hands and say, oh, it's too complex, I'm not going to do this, but to say it's a disservice to the Israelis and Palestinians to think that posting on this device creates any meaningful change in this region.
You know, first of all, I'm going to listen to the recording of this over and over and over. Having said all of that, there's a whole other element that I need you to address for us if you can. And that's that sensation of being sucker punched, gutted. Many of us are not as articulate or as informed as you are. I mean, I would put you up against anybody, and I know that you could bring an even-handed conversation, but I didn't know half of what you were talking about. And yet I feel this feeling I'm compelled to somehow stand up for my people, stand up for our homeland. But we're not all going to get to the place that you're at. This is your life. This is what you do. What happens to those of us who don't have your language and your background, who want to do something? What can we do?
I mean, here's my concern, Adrian. Anything I say is going to feel like a Band-Aid for most people.
Right?
And I know that that's frustrating. I also feel like what we're seeing right now and why we feel the urge to do so desperately, it's because the pipe has broken and our basement is flooding at the moment. I mean, flooding. We are in waist deep. And, everyone's saying, what do we do? What do we do? You turn off the water is what you do, because otherwise we're going to destroy the house.
How do you turn off the water?
So how do you turn off the water is the question. And the answer for me is actually not so complicated. It actually begins first with the conversations you have in the home. Because if you don't feel prepared to have them outside with other people, you better not start to have them, because it doesn't take long before you expose your lack of information and your knowledge to others, which is highly problematic. Now, again, I don't expect everyone to be a scholar in the field, but I do think we need to have some basic information. You need to understand, what do people mean when they say ethnic cleansing? You need to understand what people mean when they say colonialist settler, right? When Black Lives Matter comes out with a statement and says, we stand with the Palestinians against the colonialist settler state, you need to know what that means, because it's very clear what it means. Israel, you are white. Jews, you are white. And therefore, you have no right to be part of this place. You need to understand that. You need to understand that there has been a connection to this land for millennia before Zionism even emerges as a nation state, right? We face eastward and pray 3 times a day towards Zion. It's deep within, right? When we are banished from Jerusalem, right? What do? We sit down by the waters of Babylon and weep. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, what happens? My right hand, what happens, right? That's what happens. We cleave to it. We know. That's how deep it is within our DNA. Now, yes, some of that is meta-historical, some of that is real, some of it is imagined. Wherever you fall on that spectrum, it's important to understand that this is a place that we have had a connection to and a historical relationship with, and it extends far beyond what begins in 1948.
I'll say. So I know you're not a therapist, although you could probably function as one today. How do we deal with our children? Our adult children, our teenage children, our woke children, our small children who are asking questions. I mean, you've seen the news. Look what happened in Los Angeles. I live in Toronto. It's a nightmare here too. New York has had issues. I find that young people tend to internalize self-loathing and push away the thing that makes them feel uncomfortable. When is it too soon to start talking to your children about the facts and the truth? And how do you deal with those that you love that see the situation, for right or for wrong, very differently than you do?
So I want to say that there's a really important professor named Sivan Sakai who has been working on research to talk about how young people can identify with complexity at a very young age around the Israeli-Palestinian discussion.
Mhm.
And you can begin creating a nuanced discourse with 5-year-olds all the way up. It doesn't, right?
What does it sound like to talk to a 5-year-old?
Sure. So let me give you an example. My 5-year-old was with me in Israel several years ago. And my 5-year-old says to me, Ima, why are there different license plates? Some are yellow, some are white.
Right.
Can you explain that? And then we have a conversation, because there are different license plates. And there's a reason there are different license plates. That's a very clear, concrete example of how you can begin that conversation, right? You can say to an 8-year-old, Israel is a Jewish and democratic state. Israel cares about Jews, but it also cares about citizens who are not Jewish. Just like in this country, you don't just have to be Christian, you can be anything, right? And they can get that. They understand that in very simplistic terms. And then you can begin to add layers of complexity, just like we do any other subject. But here's what we've done for a really long time. Instead of doing maintenance on our pipes, we've allowed them to corrode and then burst. And then we're all hurrying to figure out, how do you turn off the water? And if we had been doing maintenance on our pipes, you wouldn't have to worry about them bursting and everyone looking and seeking the quick takeaway and the superficial meme that we can post. We aren't literate. Do you want, like, Adrian, the people of the book are not literate about Israel.
I know.
That's insane.
So what do you do when you know your neighbor, your 20-year-old, you know, young man, young woman neighbor says that Israel's an apartheid state, when you know how ludicrous that is, but you're talking to somebody who has been fired up by their own social media, that hasn't looked at both sides as clearly. I mean, I found your presentation to be extraordinarily objective, to the point where there were a couple of times I went like this, and I felt squirmy, which is how I know you're doing a fantastic job. But I don't know how to maintain peace when you're dealing with a generation of people who have not done the research, or who have aligned themselves on the other side, and that includes Jews. I mean, is there any point to opening the conversation?
Look, I think you always have to know with whom you are speaking, but most individuals don't have a historical context and are what I would refer to as don't knows. They may be deeply influenced by the current social justice zeitgeist, but they actually don't know anything about much of the issues that we're talking about today. And you can say to someone, especially if you're in a relationship with them, listen, I get that you care about this cause. I understand that you think to be on the right side of history, you need to align yourselves with this particular idea of free Palestine. But let me explain to you that Israel has tried to engage and create a Palestinian state since 1937, 1947. There has been continuous rejection of the idea of living side by side, a Jewish and democratic state and a free Palestinian state. Let me tell you why this is painful for me, who cares about Israel and Palestinians. Let me tell you why it matters that Hamas abuses the people that it holds hostage in Gaza Strip. Hostage. Those individuals don't have freedom of speech, freedom of autonomy. They can't express their gender identity. Women can't drive cars unless Hamas agrees to it. So, right? So you say, you think Palestinians want to live with that leadership? But that's who they have. So when someone says, I mean, I'm seeing a question here right now that says, you know, what do you say to the 18-year-old who says that kids are being killed? And I say with real empathy, you're right. Innocent Palestinian children are being killed. And they're being killed because Israel has a right to defend itself. And the Hamas leadership has decided to use its military, right, of army and its arsenal within the backyard of innocent Palestinians and create an opportunity where they are the human shields. So yes, who do I think is responsible? Hamas. But am I deeply saddened by the loss of innocent Palestinian life? 1,000%.
What can we do? I mean, I know you said we should get literate, we should learn, but is there anything tangible that we should be doing? Look, Rach, can you weigh in a little bit on the anti-Semitism that we're feeling around the world? And
yeah, look, I mean, we all saw it.
People are frightened.
And they should be, right?
Yeah.
We saw when you literally see mobs and bullies hanging out their windows, honking their horns, wearing keffiyehs, covering their faces, raising Palestinian flags, This is not how individuals operate when they desire a strong peace. This is not how you build bridges between communities. You are looking to incite. When you are screaming through those windows, where are the Jews? I want the Jews. We should feel deep chills in our bones. I mean, this is the Cossacks of 1919 in Ukraine.
I know.
Jews are the prey for these individuals, and nothing about them tells me that they care about Palestinians. What it tells me is that they hate Jews.
Yeah.
So that's very clear. In North London, when we saw individuals saying, we're going to rape your daughters, what? Right? So this is pure anti-Semitism. There is no exception about it. There is no gray. It is very, very clear. And you have to label it every time you see it. And we as Jews have to stand up against it. And we have to say to the rest of the woke community, where are you? Are they to your left? Are they to the right? Are they behind you? Because I'm pretty sure they're nowhere to be found.
Right.
And if we are expected, and all of us do it to a certain extent, decide to engage in these social justice issues because we believe in allyship, then we have to say to all these people and call a spade, this is performative. You only come and support the ones you desire when it feels like it's okay for you. But you actually have simplified this to a point in which Jews aren't viewed as a vulnerable minority because of a skin color. That is patently false. Patently.
Rachel, my heart is pounding. There are so many questions. I can't get to all of them. I think we may need a part 2.
Always happy, always. I mean, listen, I think what's hard here, Adrienne, is that, and I'm seeing some of the questions, not all of them, is that, look, it does feel overwhelming. I understand that we say we need to be engaged in a complex conversation and look at the nuance. But I also recognize that not everyone is going to sit here and have time to read deeply and invest in it at this moment. But I do think we have to say, look, we're going to read 3 news sources. We're going to read from the left, we're going to read from the right, and we're going to read from the center. And we have to read from each of them. And that's not a huge time commitment, right? I mean, if you're only getting your news from Trevor Noah and John Oliver and from a TikTok, channel and someone's Instagram story, something's wrong. Like, what do you do? Is that how you get your news normally? Because I would hope not. So if it is, you need to change that habit. And we know that you can look at those different sources and be able to say, okay, I have a variety of perspectives. You can also look at what is Palestinian media saying? What is the larger Arab media saying? Right? This is not more than a 30-minute investment in your day. If you can work out for 30 minutes, you can read for 30 minutes.
100%. That's the first call to action. I want to concretize that for all of our viewers. Inform yourself. One way of doing this is to ensure that whatever feed you're getting, that you aggressively look for the opposing position, a more neutral position, something further to the left, further to the right, something more centrist, where you are actively pushing yourself beyond the algorithm of preaching to the choir. That gives you talking points. The second call to action that I'm considering right now from what you're saying is that if we're looking for the ideal social media post, where you're trying not to be overly political, but sociologically, you are dealing with the reality. Maybe it's one of those statements like, first they came for the and then they came for the and then they came, and now they've come for me and there's no one to stand for me. Jews are at the forefront of every ism, for better or for worse, sometimes misguided and sometimes rightly. We are the ones who push all of those, make your screen black today, just say no. I mean, that's where we are, but there's nobody there for us. I believe that needs to be called out, but I don't believe that means we should stop supporting causes that we believe in if they're not Jewish.
Agree.
So step 1, consider not responding to the bullies on your feed. Don't give them airtime. Stop following celebrities. Stop giving celebrities credence around things outside of something that's been scripted for them. Many celebrities that we perceive like actors and actresses, they read scripts. This is like, so perhaps start unfollowing that which is blatantly anti-Semitic, and consider before you post who you've posted for in the past and whether you're going to call people out. And last but not least, and I thought this was brilliant, private message people and ask to have a conversation that's more nuanced. And as momentum, I'm going to add one more thing. Pray. Pray in your own voice, in your own language, to the God as you understand God to be. But we need help. You're right. The basement is flooded and we are knee deep in you know what. Rachel, you're my favorite plumber, and I'm so glad we called you. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. We are going to have to do a part 2 because it's too important to leave it. But thank you so much for joining us all tonight. Thank you.